We are built to serve. We are at our best when we serve. We're designed to be in service, and our bechira is who to serve.
Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to Shtark Tank. Those of you who don't know, Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Bnei Torah in the workforce. This is our third live event and our first ever doing a podcast-style conversation live. So usually I have the luxury of editing things a lot, but here we're going to be all open. Just a few quick thank yous. A big thank you to Jeremy and to DLA Piper for hosting this wonderful event. This is a relatively new space, but you should continue to use it for wonderful things for many years to come. So thank you, Jeremy. Also, thank you to Adi. Adi is a wonderful center in Jerusalem and the Negev. If anyone wants a very inspirational tour to see really what the best of Israel has to offer in terms of chesed and sensitivity, is welcome to coordinate with me afterwards, and I'm happy to show you guys around Adi Negev. This year has also been sponsored in memory of Shlomo David ben Ruvain Stanley Cohen, by his son, Simon Cohen. Simon's mother actually passed away last night, so we'll also dedicate our learning, Le'iloi Nishmas Yehudit Shlomit Bat Braina. So thank you to Simon for helping out as well. And we're here to talk about Pesach and about freedom and about slavery. And a personal pet peeve of mine with regards to all of our chagim is that there are all these details. There's a wonderful text of the Haggadah, and there are vorts on every single word and letter. And there are all these mitzvahs of matzah and maror, and there's vorts on each and everything. But with all of the trees, we don't always take a step back and look at the forest. And the forest, in this case, is the idea of avdus lecheros, which is a very fundamental celebration that we are celebrating on Pesach. And we're here to talk about that today. So the first question that I want to ask Rabbi Lapin is, what is the definition of avdus lecheros, in light of the fact that we know that we're very proud of our identity as being Avdei Hashem? So we're Avdei Paro, and now we're Avdei Hashem. So what are we celebrating on Pesach?
Thanks a lot, Yaakov, and thanks for having me and the opportunity of meeting all of these wonderful people. Just a bracha to all of you. You're all involved in Kiddush Hashem every day of your lives. You're people who are Bnei Torah, represent Bnei Torah, and you're out in the workforce. What you're doing is important in many, many different spheres. And one of it is just in the area of Kiddush Hashem, and really great to meet everybody, so I appreciate that. To your point about slavery and avdus to Para, avdus to Hashem, yes, it's a bit of a misnomer. This cherus thing is a little bit of a misnomer, because as you say, it doesn't really work. In fact, there's a beautiful Bnei Yisachar that talks about why so much happens on the 14th of Nisan. It's the only Yom Tov that starts the day before Yom Tov. Normally, the halachas of a Yom Tov, the halachot of a Yom Tov start when the Yom Tov comes in at Shkia. Here we've got the whole thing with set of halachot, including bir chometz and not eating chometz, which starts a long time before Pesach actually comes in on the 14th, which was the time for the Korban Pesach. But why was the Korban Pesach the day before? We mentioned the Korban Pesach in the Musaf of first day Pesach. So why isn't it done together with the Musaf of first day Pesach? That would be the right time for it. Why do we say Hallel on the 14th and on the night of the 15th? There are a lot of strange things, and the Bnei Yisachar quotes a halacha that we have in Yoredeh Daf Siman Reish Samech Zayin, that if you're thinking of buying a non-Jewish slave, an Eved Knani, has your office ever had to deal with such a... If you're going to buy an Eved Kanani, you've got to be a little careful, because you're going to put him into the mikveh, because he takes on the mitzvot that a woman, the mitzvot aseh as grama, he takes on at the time that he becomes an Eved Kanani. You put him into the mikveh, he could pop out of the mikveh and say, my kavanah, my intention in that mikveh was for cherus. I wanted to become a full Jew. That's what I had in mind. I did not have in mind to be an Eved to a Jewish person after this. And that would be a problem. He would then be free. So the Gemara says, Gemara in Yevamos, that the Shulchan Aruch paskins, the thing to do is, while he's in the mikveh, give him something to do for you. So he's got to be an Eved while he's in the mikveh. I try to imagine what some of those things could be. I don't know exactly. I guess now with waterproof phones and things, you could have him working on the cell phone, sending emails, who knows what. But he has to be in Avdus during the time of the Geirut, so to say, so that he doesn't have a moment of freedom, when he can say, I'm no longer an Eved to my non-Jewish boss, and now I'm free altogether. So says the Bnei Yisachar, the Rebbeinu Shalom did with the Bnei Yisrael. He started them with Avdus before he gave them Geirut. So on Yud Daled, on the 14th of Nisan, we have mitzvot. We have the mitzvah Bris Milah, we have the mitzvah Korban Pesach, and we don't even have Cherus yet. By the time we have Cherus, we're already deep in the mitzvot. We're already deeply enslaved to the Ribono Shel Olam. So then comes the question, so what is the Cherus? And you can say, we know that the Kaf Alehem Har Kegigit, that we didn't have the opportunity to reject the mitzvot at Har Sinai. That only came much later, because there really wasn't Cherut. So what do we mean by Cherut? And the Chazal of Al Tikra Cherut, El Charut, that it's engraved. Engravery is the very opposite of freedom. Freedom is like using a computer screen where you can just press delete and it's gone. Writing on a piece of paper is already a little harder, but to engrave in stone, that's the ultimate of not freedom. Why is that? What's the connection with Charut and Cherut? And I think what's important is that once we take on Avdut Hashem, we have an amazing Cherut. We have a kind of a Cherut that most people don't appreciate and many people don't have. Cherut isn't being free to do what you want, because let us assume that Cherut is a human quality. It's unlikely that Cherut is an animal quality. Otherwise, what would we go from? Is that what Hashem gave us on Pesach? In this, to be as free as the animals are? Yeah, the free animals are free. If you go on safari, you see how free the animals are. They can roam around, they can walk where they want, they can eat what they want, they can do what they want. What are animals not free to do? There's only one thing animals are not free to do, and that's to act against their instinct. An animal is completely governed by its instinct. It cannot act outside of its instinct. It's programmed instinctually. A human being, particularly once you have the Torah as the mechanism, is free to act counter-instinctually. We can want to eat something and say no. We can want to say something and hold back and not say it. Why? Because it's a mitzvah of the Ribono Shel Olam. We have that the human being and the Jewish person through Torah is brought to the pinnacle of this capability to choose not to do what you want to do. That's Cherus. Cherus is the human ability to act against your own instinct, which comes through Torah. That's how I like to define Cherus. Does that make sense?
It does. And then it sort of reminds us of the idea of Bechira Chavshis, which the Rambam says is the fundamental idea. And when the Rambam describes Bechira Chavshis, Paro is a key player in that parak of the Rambam. So how are we to apply these ideas nowadays? Sometimes people who are employees, they feel like they are free, but sometimes they might feel like they are avadim. So how do we take these ideas of Bechira Chavshis and Chiros and apply that to our identity as professionals?
So again, even in the professional area, as you say, where we have a level of avdus, we're serving, we're working. If one chooses to be an employee, which nowadays most of us have to be, few of us have the luxury of running our own entrepreneurial business and being our own bosses, and even entrepreneurs are slaves to their investors or slaves to their customers. We don't get away from slavery. We are designed and we're born la'ovda or l'shomra. Already in the time of Gan Eden, it was la'ovda or l'shomra. We've never had a time, humanity has never had a time where they are free from avodah, where they don't have to work, where they don't have to serve. We are built to serve. We are at our best when we serve. American Express commissioned a survey. I don't know if we mentioned on a previous podcast. This goes back about 30 years ago. They commissioned a survey looking at what people find most pleasurable. So they connected electrodes to the brain and they gave them different images of different activities and they measured pleasurability. And one of the highest was receiving service, good service. When you go to a beautiful hotel or a beautiful restaurant and you're treated like a mensch, people really found that very pleasurable. But the highest of all by far was giving service. That gave people the highest levels of pleasure. Giving somebody service and seeing that being appreciated. Our whole body and our neshamas are all designed, and our minds are all designed for avodah, because we're put here to serve Hashem. Now, some of us can spend 90% of our time serving Hashem, but most of us can't. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be serving, because we're designed to be in service, and our bechira is who to serve. That's our first bechira. You can't get away from serving. You can choose who you want to serve. Do you want to serve your parnasa? You want to serve your business? Do you want to serve entertainment? Do you want to serve your family? Do you want to serve your wife? Do you want to serve your husband? Do you want to serve your government? Do you want to serve the nation? Do you want to serve Hashem? Do you want to serve the Torah? That you can choose at times of the day and different days in the week and different weeks in the year. You'll be serving different entities, and that's the bechiras, who to serve, but not whether to serve. sometimes we find ourselves in work, and I think you're alluding to this, Yaakov, that in work so often we find ourselves in situations we didn't choose. You're working for a company and you've got to turn up, you've got to be somewhere at a certain time, you've got to travel to a certain place at a certain time, things you've got to do, and you don't really have the choice to say no. But the important part of Bechira is, and I think this is fundamental to Viktor Frankl's whole thesis that he developed during the concentration camps, when he realized I have no control to choose my environment in the concentration camp. This is something I'm given and there's nothing I can do about it. But I can choose at every moment how to respond to it. I can choose at every moment what to feel about it, what to be thinking about it. That's that choice I have. And so it is with work as well. We often can't choose what we're doing, but we can certainly choose the way we go about it. As I mentioned, we're all involved in Kiddush Hashem. We can choose, do you want to be a Kiddush Hashem or do you want to Chas v'Sholom be a Hashem at work? We make that choice. How we go about. And again, in work too, the things we don't do. It's the things we don't do that really define us. And if you think about it, it's firstly in the Torah itself, there are more mitzvahs lo ta'aseh than there are mitzvahs aseh. We're defined by the things we're not allowed to do. Shabbos is more about the things we can't do than the things we can do. If you look at spaces, it's what makes a library and not a football field? It's that you're not allowed to play football in a library. It's the things you can't do in a library. It's not the books that make it a library. You've got lots of places where there are books. That doesn't make it a library. It's all the law says. When you're in a library, you can't talk on your cell phone, you can't talk loud, you can't run around the place. There are a lot of things you can't do. That makes it a library. Kedusha comes from the things that you're not allowed to do in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Kodesh Kadosh. All the Kedushot that we have, all the sanctity that we have, comes from the things we're not allowed to do. We define ourselves by what we choose not to do. We don't define ourselves by the things we do. We're all very similar in the things we do, but we're very different in the things that we won't do no matter what. And that's where our Bechira is, to decide what is that red line. These are things we would never do. That defines us, and that's our Bechira.
It's very important to be able to have that approach of Viktor Frankl, that each moment there is Bechira and there is an ability to respond. But taking a step back and looking at our lives as professionals, oftentimes it can be very, 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 very busy. And the Mesilas Yesharim has this great description where Bnei Israel come to Paro, we wanted to leave and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and what does Paro say? You got to work harder. And the Mesilas Yesharim says, you see from here that someone who's so busy has a very hard time living a spiritually attuned life. So taking a step back and looking at the big picture of how many commitments and obligations and work and other things going on, how does Rabbi Lapin suggest that we try to live spiritually inspired lives despite all of the things going on?
So that's answered by Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair in the brisa that the Mesilas Yesharim is built upon. It's interesting. It's zehirut mevi'ah lidei zrizut. If you want to get a zariz, and a zariz means somebody who's passionate, somebody who's active, somebody who's high energy, the precondition to that is zehirut. And zehirut means pausing. Zehirut means taking a step back in the moment, to be able to, in the moment, just take a second. When I teach this, the amount of time it takes for zehirut is as long as it takes to take one breath. If you just pause and take one slow breath, that's about 4 seconds, that's all you need to recalibrate and to be able to pull yourself back and make a decision and say, is this something I should be doing? And not to react. Reacting is if you don't even take that breath. But to be able to take that breath, and it's interesting that the Neshama and the Neshama are connected. When you take that breath, you are able to connect with your Neshama. That's the zehirut that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is talking about. Before you do the zrizut, before you rush into the thing because you're energetic, to just have that moment. I had a client who's the CEO of one of the largest banks in the world, said to me, when he hires people, he looks for 2 characteristics: caring and urgency. Zehirut and Zrizut. And he isn't a Jewish person. He said, everything else I can teach. If they've got Zehirut and Zrizut, everything else follows. That's the whole price of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Everything follows if you've got Zehirut and Zrizut. So you might say, so how do you get to Zehirut at least? So that the Mesilas Yesharim answers. It's through the learning of Torah, if one can find the time. And we're not even talking about how much time, we're talking about quality of time. And part of the reason, as you know, Yaakov, that I started the Matmonim was because I was concerned about the quality of time that people spend on Daf Yomi, not the quantity. It's this incredible thing that so many people are doing this and are giving time every single day and are learning Gemara and whatever learning people are doing in addition to learning Gemara. It's a most incredible thing, and I would never belittle it even the tiniest little bit. But the quality of that time, are you allowing yourselves the time just to sit with a chazal and reflect on it? And think about it, and apply it, and extrapolate it and be mechadish a little bit to come up with new insights. Or we're just going on this treadmill, turning the pages, and we never really engage with high quality in that. So that Torah Mevia Lidei Zehirut is just a few moments every day of serious engagement with Torah. In the Matmonim today, it's not yet published. We talked about an Eglei Tal in the Hakdama of the Eglei Tal. The Avnei Nezer wrote the Eglei Tal on Hilchot Shabbat, and he talks about the mistake people make thinking that if you have fun learning, it's not lishma. And he says, similar to what Reb Chaim Volozhin also says in Nefesh HaChaim, he says that is the lishma. The highest level of learning is to just have such fun, to really enjoy it. But it's difficult to do that if you're moving at a massive pace and that's your only learning. It's good to do that, to follow a pace and to get through Shas in 7 years. That's a wonderful thing, and to do it over many times, wonderful, wonderful thing. But that can't be all the learning, because that's not fun. Real fun is to be able to take a few words of Torah and really be able to develop it and integrate it and absorb it and find insights and look out into the world after you've learned that Chazal and the world looks different. That's the kind of joy that you want to get from Torah. And that brings you to the Zehirut, to being able to just take a moment when you're in the heat of a situation, that the Torah you learned that day should inspire you just to pause, take a breath, recalibrate, and compose your response.
Sometimes I get shidduch resumes and I'm involved from one side or the other. And oftentimes a term that's thrown around is someone who's kovea itim. And what they mean is someone who's going to take their learning seriously and also be a professional. But the word kavua is something which is set. And Rav Aaron Lichtenstein has a very beautiful essay where he talks about the fact that kvias is not just having the time in your schedule, but also the mindset that the learning is kavua, and it's kavua in you. It's also one of the perushim on being kovea itim, that the Torah should be kavua in you. So I certainly appreciate that as well. I want to shift a little bit to go back to the idea of freedom. So we all grew up in a society, some of us grew up in America or in a Western society dominated by American values. And so we think about this idea of freedom and the American dream of, this is the life of being able to sit on the beach and relax. Is this like a hidden danger? Because when we think of our engagement with the outside world, so we'll think of dangers about modesty, dangers about heresy, other types of dangers of being engaged. But is this also a subtle danger as far as how the outside world thinks about freedom and how we should be thinking about freedom?
So the freedom part is okay, particularly if we use the lens that we started off with as to what cherus really means. But I think one of the issues to look at is the role of entertainment. How much of freedom is the freedom to pursue entertainment? And I often wonder, and I have not ever found data on this. Maybe somebody has data or can find it, and I would love to get the data. How much of the American economy, of the GDP of the United States, is entertainment-based? That means sports, Hollywood, restaurants, and all the industries around those. What percentage of the American economy is entertainment-based? Instinctively, intuitively, I would think it's over 50%, and maybe a lot more than that. I just don't know. But it's a huge amount. And to think about entertainment, and entertainment can be an addiction. Again, if entertainment is something I choose, mindfully, consciously, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. For half an hour, I just want to listen to some music, or I want to watch something or read something. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's as important as having a meal, as taking a shower, as having a nap. These are things we need. We need that kind of relaxation. But when the entertainment becomes an addiction, it becomes problematic. And addiction is something we've talked about, Yaakov, addiction to technology, and you probably want to get into that as well. Addiction to our cell phones, addiction to technology, addiction to money, work, whatever it is. When we think of addiction, we think of addiction to substances. And we don't realize that a lot of us who are not addicted to substances are addicted to other behaviors. And they're as serious. There are a lot of young people, as you all know, I'm sure, who cannot keep Shabbos, who are so addicted. Just as you have people who cannot keep off a drug, off a substance, you've got people who cannot for one day keep their hands off a cell phone. Teachers tell me, educators tell me that they have to allow the kids in the classes to be operating their cell phones. They can't listen, they can't think if their hands aren't busy on the cell phone because they're completely addicted to that. So addiction, there are all sorts of definitions for addiction, and I'm no expert, but as much as I've thought about it, and I'm not talking about chemical addiction, about an addiction which is actually a physiological issue. I'm talking about the kind of behavioral addiction we're talking about. Impulsiveness is an escape from responsibility. And that's what entertainment is. It's this world of escape. I have a friend who, when virtual reality first came on, he told me he was involved in the industry, and when he first put the goggles on and he was in virtual reality, he didn't want to come out. It was much nicer than the real world. And how scary that is. And in a sense, that's what's already happening, although it's not necessarily with virtual reality. So that need for entertainment, for escapism, what are you escaping? you're escaping responsibility. Now, escaping responsibility is very serious because the idea of responsibility, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to talk, and there's some essays of his on it. The siyata dishmaya, he calls it the reach ha'emet, the ability to have almost a sixth sense, to know reality, to know truth, comes with responsibility. Anybody who has a responsibility has with it the sixth sense needed to be able to function. 5 cents aren't enough. 5 cents aren't enough to operate in the complex world in which we are. Even in halakha, we know that we talk about the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch. The 4 chalakim are not enough. You need that sixth sense. You need to be able to understand, to have a deep intuitive understanding of what's right and wrong. And we what Yeshayahu Hanavi speaks when he speaks about Mashiach. He speaks V'herichu beyiras Hashem reach ha'emes. It's, and Rashi says on that it's demoirach v'doim. The Gemara says that Mashiach will be able to take a sniff and make a halachic decision. That will come from an intuitive part of him. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says that because the Mashiach has that responsibility. Somebody who isn't Mashiach won't have that gift. We all have the gift in the areas of our responsibility. That's why backseat driving is so dangerous. The driver has an awareness that no passenger has got. Sometimes, but obviously you have to have the basics. You've got to be able to drive. You've got to have the expertise as well. But whether you're a physician or you're in business or you're taking care of your family, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to talk about the role of a mother and a wife. A pediatrician once said to me, if a mother says there's something wrong with a baby, I will examine and examine and examine until I find it. Because she knows better than any test can prove. She knows. And that's the idea of when Hashem gives us a responsibility, we have this extra quality of intuition. And the escape from responsibility that comes with entertainment and addiction is also an abandonment of that sixth sense. And now you're living your life only with 5 senses when the Rebbeinu Shalom expects you to have 6 senses in order to be able to live the life. And people become zombies and people become robotic. And people become inhuman and unhuman. And we see that in the United States, perhaps more than anywhere else. We actually see that in the street all the time, that roboticness of people. So we have to be really careful of that. And you're so right. We have to be careful of the things that are explicit, the questions of pritzut and questions of kashrut and Shabbos and Lashon Hara. There are all sorts of things we have to be careful of. But perhaps most of all is this tendency to become addicted to what we're doing.
So we open up this conversation defining Chayrus as the ability to go against our instincts, and that sort of ties into what you were just talking about as far as technology goes, and the technology which has been such a bracha for Matmonim and for Shtark Tank and for everyone and all they're doing, also comes with a lot of dangers, some really dark dangers like addictions, and even just smaller dangers of compulsively checking your phone when you're supposed to be with a colleague or with a family member. So in light of all of what we're talking about, would it be safe to say that the idea of Avdus is very much relevant today as it ever has been? And what would be some advice to practically going to work, trying to stay focused, and going home, trying to stay focused in light of all of the distractions and all of the compulsive behaviors that our phones and other devices present with us?
So I think one of the things that I find helpful is to remind myself constantly that focus means one thing. You can't focus on more than one thing. So if you are doing 2 things, you're focused on neither. And there's enough research to show that that's where the mistakes happen. People don't remember things when they're multitasking. For example, when I'm talking to a group of people, whether it's professionally or in Torah, I insist that their cameras are on. If you want to see me, I want to see you. If you don't want to be seen, you don't need to hear me either. Because when people have their cameras off, you know they're busy multitasking. That's why their cameras are off, because they're doing something else. And there's no point. To me, there's just no point. Just as in the old days before it was Zoom, and when we sat around a table like this, nobody would sit at the table and pull out a pile of mail and start reading the mail while we're going, but they don't mind checking their email. Nobody would pick up a newspaper while we're having a shir and start reading the newspaper, but we'll check the phone to see what the latest news is. What is the difference? Why? Did you think you can't see it because it's a little phone? Nobody can notice. It's exactly the same. Your mind is off what's happening. You've excused yourself from what's happening, or worse, you haven't excused yourself from what's happening. You've just brought the outside world into the room. That's a chutzpah. Don't bring the outside world into the room. If you want to look at your phone, there's a door. Step outside, look at your phone, come back again. So just to remind ourselves, and to when one's driving, or when one's speaking to one's wife, or to one's children, or to one's husband, to Talmidim, just to remember You can't be doing two, you can't have your mind in two places. And there's much more value in short periods of focus than long periods of multitasking. And just to keep, where, you know, the Chofetz Chaim talks about how valuable the exercise of not talking Lashon Hara is, because it's so easy to talk. So to hold yourself back, it's not just that you don't talk the Lashon Hara. By holding yourself back, you're developing the muscle of restraint. You're developing Zehirut. Because if you can hold your mouth back, you can hold back on anything. You have a master of have mastered your impulses if you can hold your mouth. I believe if the Chofetz Chaim were alive today, he would say, yeah, Lashon Hara, it's great and important, but this is the real problem. If you can hold yourself back from checking your phone at the times when one shouldn't be, and you can check it at the times when one should, then you've got mastery, you've got control of everything. If you can control your phone, you can control everything. To realize that this is just a chefza, this is just an object. You're a gavra, you're a human being. Does it control you? If it controls you, it's the gavra and you're the chefza. It's the subject, it's the human, it's the master, and you're an object, and you're being manipulated by all the forces that are. And we have to be able to switch that relationship. This is here as a tool for me to use in my avodas Hashem. It's not here as something to control me. I'm here to control it, and to be conscious of it and aware of that, and make sure that we exercise it deliberately every day, several times during the day. When you really want to look at your phone, to decide not to do it, just to put it away for another 5 minutes and look at it a little bit later, just to exercise that muscle of restraint, that zehirut that can then lead us to this rizut, and ultimately to anava and to ruach hakodesh and all the wonderful things that come later on.
I have a few more questions here, but I think it's more important. I would definitely like to open up a conversation. Anyone has questions on these very fundamental topics, maybe we'll take the mic around if anyone wants to ask anything about the conversation that we've been having so far.
Assalamu alaikum, David Eisen, thank you for coming. Regarding Torah being fun, so my Rosh Hashiva Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's first article that he ever published was Lule Torah's Chashashuai, that a person should frolic and should enjoy Torah. So
Nice.
Absolutely, so you have a good time at the Messiah. You had mentioned that Kedusha is something where someone avoids their instinct and that they should avoid. How does that jive with the Ramban's Shita with respect to Perot Shvi'it, that you must partake, you must eat of the Kedusha? I find it very troubling in the Makolet when it says, Lelo chashash tevel u'shvit. Shvit is not something we should be choshish from. We should embrace it.
So it's not to say that they're not mitzvahs haseh. There are lots of things we have to do. It doesn't mean it's only about what we're not to. But what makes it shvit? What makes it shvit is that we don't trade in it, that we don't use it, that it's the law ta'asehs of the shvit that make it shvit. Once it's shvit, we need to partake in it. We need to be active in it. Same as Shabbos. What makes Shabbos or the Lamed Tet Melachot? Once you're keeping the Lamed Tet Melachot, as the Ramban says, Tishbot. Now go and enjoy Shabbos. So we've got to engage in Kedusha. But what creates Kedusha is the boundaries we put around something to keep everything out. That creates Kedusha. So the same idea of creating boundaries for this thing is exactly the same idea, that there's Kedushat HaMachshava, that there's Kedushat HaMakom, that there's Kedushat HaTorah, that while we're busy with tefillah and with Torah, we create boundaries that which disturbs Kedusha is not allowed to penetrate.
I'm a colleague of Jeremy's in DLA, but what about children? I mean, adults, okay, maybe we can exhibit some more cheres, but I have found over the years trying to control the children's use of the cell phone is really, really difficult.
Oh, that is such a challenge, one of the challenges of today and one of the challenges in chinuch. And I guess one has to do it like any training, is when you start them off very young and in small amounts of time. You can have the phone for 10 minutes from this time to that time. When the time's up, we take the phone up. So you're actually building that muscle in the child rather than just giving the phone to a child at a certain age. I think that's what I feel so blessed that I'm not raising our children at this time. We had it relatively easy, and I feel so concerned for my children raising our grandchildren, and for many of you, how difficult it is and how challenging and what you're up against. We have to find, I used to be very critical of the Haredim's view of no cell phones, no computers, none of it, and I used to think you're just cutting yourself off from the work. Well, then now I say they're right. If one can afford the luxury to live like that, a lot of us in work don't have, but it's a luxury. It's a real luxury to be able to live like that. And for them, it's not a luxury. For them, it's an essential requirement. To what extent they really are successful, I don't know. But with our children, that's one of the biggest challenges, and we need to be really wise and share with each other. When you've found something that works, find forums that you can share and teach each other. This is something that worked for my children, might be something that you can use, because we're all groping around, experimenting in a world that's new to us. There's no rule book, there's no blueprint.
Rav, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. Okay, thank you so much for coming to speak. People are expecting us to be connected to our technology, our devices 24/7. What boundaries would you recommend us putting up in order to stay sane?
Also a great question. So there are situations where you can make agreements with your company, with your bosses, with your colleagues. My very first job was with a company that worked 24 hours a day. It was a trading company. It involved shipping and trading, and it was 24 hours a day. And when I had my first interview, and I said, look, there's certain days I'm not going to be available. Shabbos and Yom Tov not going to be available. They said that it can't be. I said, and what would happen if, God forbid, I had a heart attack? Would you leave me alone for a few days? They said, yeah, if you had a heart attack. Well, I'm just giving you pre-advantage notice. I'm having a heart attack once a week at certain times. Just treat me that way. And it was okay. They figured out and they managed. So one can sometimes agree on certain boundaries. And sometimes even if one is called, one doesn't always have to respond. But the best is to negotiate with people. Just to understand, you think of something in the middle of the night and you send me a WhatsApp or a text or whatever, that's fine. That's okay. But don't expect me to answer at times that I might be doing other things. In Israel, it's particularly difficult because people assume that you're on the phone all the time. They expect you to answer the phone. My phone's off. I don't answer the phone because it's disruptive. It messes up a train of thought. But it's very difficult because people, I remember Rabbi Soloveitchik telling me once when I was sitting with him and somebody was ringing the doorbell, knocking on his door, and he wouldn't even get up to see who it was. I said, there's somebody, I thought he couldn't hear. I said, there's somebody at your door that's very persistent. He said, I'm talking about Cherus, they are free to knock. I'm free to decide whether to open the door to them or not. We assume if somebody knocks at the door, you've got to open. Somebody rings, you've got to answer. You don't have to, you're free. You can make a decision. I'm not answering this call. I'll answer it later on, or I'll send a quick message and say, I'll call you later on. Skills and disciplines to train the people around us that we're not at beck and call. We have lives.
Hi. You mentioned before the importance of responsibility and not like using the addictions as an escape. What would be a litmus test maybe you can advise for, perhaps the desire to set those boundaries or to not check your phone might be a shirking of responsibilities. Your phone is where all your responsibilities are talking to you. So dafka could be a situation where hafuch al hafuch, dafka setting the boundary and not using your phone is actually avoiding responsibility.
It's a great question, but it's an easy answer. If it's hard for you and you do it nevertheless, it's not avoiding responsibility. If it's easy for you and you find it pleasurable, then you need to check. Maybe this is avoiding responsibility.
We talk about Shabbos as a Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and I was wondering if there was any advice how to make Shabbos a force for good in today's busy world, both on Shabbos and even more ambitious, but I think necessary, something that can really shape our entire week.
Shabbos is one of these things. This Shabbos was talking with one of my children, and she was just saying, if Chas v'Shalom she were to discover that the Torah wasn't true, this was all a big hoax, there was no such thing as Yiddishkeit, no such thing as Rebbeinu Shalom, she would still hold on to Shabbos. That's the one thing she would still hold on to, because how do you live today without Shabbos? And Shabbos is that time. And to bear in mind also, the Yerushalmi says that originally the Chachamim wanted to be misaken, that you can't greet each other, you can't talk on Shabbos. It was supposed to be a silent retreat, that on Shabbos you're silent and you're quiet. It wasn't meant to be a social day. We use it as a social day because we're so busy during the week. It's the only time that we have to be social, but it wasn't meant as a social day. Yom Tov is social. That's why you can cook on Yom Tov, because you're going to have guests. But Shabbos you can't cook, so that you can't have guests. So that you're just quietly at home and you just eat what you've got, and that's the time that it is. So I think we need to turn back to Shabbos, although there's great value and families being together and guests, but also to make sure that some Shabbosim, we're just on our own with our own family, quiet time, spend the time with the family, time thinking. We don't have to be doing all the time, just time to be, and to be able to slow down in this life that we've got, where everything is unreal, it's virtual. We've got to get back to real face-to-face. And where everything is fast, we've got to get back to slow. Where everything is digital, we've got to get back to physical. We've got to do things that bring us back, that ground us into what being a human is. living the kind of lives we do, the kind of digital lives we do, it's not humanity. When I'm often say, when I see you on my screen and we're having a Zoom conversation, I don't see you, I see pixels. It's pixels that are designed to look like you. But I can't see you, and I can't get the human energy to the same extent that I can if I'm with you. We need to make sure that we do that. And I've advised a lot of clients, for example, I'm sure many of you have seen it as well. There's a huge competitive advantage to get into your car or a plane and go and visit someone, because people aren't doing it anymore. In the old days, that means before COVID, when everybody was doing that, there was no competitive advantage. If you didn't do that, you didn't get a meeting. But now that the meetings are on Zoom, to actually go and call on somebody and spend some time with them, have lunch with them, or whatever it is that one wants to do is so advantageous. We must, and it's so much also with our families as well, just to make sure that we spend real time with real people doing real things that are physical and that are real. And Shabbos is a great time to do that when we're free. We really do have chayros from our technology on Shabbos. It's as if the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us Shabbos for this generation. Because no time before have we needed Shabbos as desperately as we do today. And thank goodness for the Chazon Ish's Kiddush in Hilchos Shabbos, that electrical currents, even if they're microcurrents, there's a problem of boina, because if it weren't for that, who knows, there would have been all sorts of heterium now for cell phones and for computers and we wouldn't have Shabbos. It was just unbelievable, Ruach HaKodesh that gave him that insight that saved Shabbos for us in terms of the halachic boundaries of Shabbos.
Just a quick question. I love what the Rub had said about the idea of defining Kedusha by what you can't do or what. At the same time, I find myself, and Shabbos is a great example, especially when I'm talking to Chiloni friends and colleagues, that oftentimes their attraction to religion and religious practices is when you focus on what you can do. Like Shabbos, instead of focusing on you can't do this on Shabbos, you can't do that on Shabbos. Shabbos is the ability to sit around with your family and the ability to just enjoy Divrei Torah and to enjoy singing, etc. And finding, I oftentimes come back to the first Rashi in Parshas Noach, where we talk about Noach ish sadik timim haya b'doros in the Rashi, okay, Ganai or Shavach, and I saw a shot many years ago where it talks about why specifically does Rashi talk about Noach relative to Avraham Avinu. The grammar would have been, okay, in his generation, yes or no, and in any other generation, but it specifically mentions Avraham. And I saw a nice shot that said Avraham is the quintessential mitzvah saseh. Everything that we learn about Avraham is the positive commandments. And I find that in my interactions with a lot of Chiloni friends, focusing on that, and that's where Kedusha also, yes, there's Kedusha, obviously, Kedusha might be defined in what you can do, but at the same time, what attracts a lot of people to our religion is how beautiful it is in terms of what you. So how do you strike that balance?
So it's really interesting, because of course there was somebody that preceded you and I and all of us who got that right at great cost and started a religion called Christianity that has a lot of mitzvahs aseh and no mitzvahs lo taseh. So one has to be a bit careful with that, because at the end of the day, what makes it possible for us to sit with our family? What makes it possible for us not to be on our phones? What makes it possible for us not to be going and have the kids all over it's the lo taseh that make that possible. And that's what one has to teach, even the Chiloni or the non-Jewish person, that it's the lo taseh that creates the opportunity for the aseh. It's the things you're not allowed to do in the library that make you able to read in the library. If you could do all the other things, you wouldn't be able to focus on your reading. So that balance of teaching, yes, it's not the law. We don't celebrate the law taseh. The law taseh create the space, whether it's a space in time or a space physically, in which we can bring the Kedusha and live the Kedusha. And the balance of the two together is what masters Yiddishkeit.
Thank you, Rabbi Lapin. Thank you, everyone, for coming.